People are completely unaware of what's coming. Trump just made an announcement that goes beyond typical political maneuvering. This is about pure influence, and it has the potential to transform the way America operates for the next decade. Consider the possibility that everything from real estate values to your employment to the retirement security you've been counting on might be on the verge of shifting due to this one decision. I'm going to explain what's actually underneath Trump's recent move, the concealed domino effect that's already tearing through Washington, and the reason even those who oppose him are quietly preparing for what's ahead. Let's begin with his actual words. Because underneath the surface coverage, there's an enormous indicator that most people entirely overlooked. You understand that feeling when you encounter news and something inside tells you there's far more happening than what's being presented? That's precisely what occurred when Trump spoke with reporters aboard Air Force One not long ago. Cameras were recording, questions were being thrown at him, and then he said something that made those involved in politics stop cold. He didn't simply criticize someone from his own political party. That's a regular occurrence in Washington. What he actually did was establish a harsh boundary regarding who remains within his movement and who gets forced out. And the manner in which he did this revealed a narrative extending well past one individual or one conflict. The representative was Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone who previously stood directly next to him at political gatherings defending him when virtually no one else would. However, in the past several months, she began diverging from his positions, making appearances on liberal media outlets, challenging his approach to foreign policy, and even voting alongside Democrats on significant legislation. Then the ultimate transgression occurred. She shared a screenshot of her private text messages with Trump following his withdrawal of support. For him, that crossed the line, representing the ultimate act of disloyalty. So, while on Air Force One, he made it public. He ridiculed her by calling her Marjorie Taylor Brown, stated she had shifted politically leftward, and made absolutely clear she was excluded from the MAGA movement. Within a matter of hours, he was already receiving interest from potential opponents prepared to challenge her in Georgia. But the important point is this situation wasn't actually about her. It was about delivering a harsh warning to every other Republican in Congress. Maintain your loyalty, or you could be the next target. When you have control over a political movement, loyalty isn't simply desired, it's required. And Trump was reminding everyone observing that he continues to possess that movement. Not the party leadership, not the press, not anyone else. Simultaneously, Trump shifted focus away from that week's scandal. Fresh Epstein document releases intended to damage him, and he labeled the whole narrative a fabrication. Then he immediately transitioned to what he claimed truly mattered: making things affordable, addressing cost of living concerns, prioritizing Americans. That represented the strategic maneuver. While opponents believed they had trapped him with controversy, he altered the entire playing field. Consider how this functions in actual situations. Picture yourself in a discussion where someone's attempting to make you appear foolish by bringing up your previous errors. You face two options: expend all your effort justifying those errors, allowing them to dictate the discussion, or acknowledge it quickly and immediately transition to your current actions and future plans. The latter approach prevents them from establishing the framework. You establish it. That's what Trump executed, and it's the reason so many individuals involved in politics, irrespective of their personal opinions about him, were observing carefully. Now, why does any of this have relevance for you? Because underneath all the political spectacle, there's a significantly more crucial narrative developing, and it concerns something affecting every single person watching this video, particularly if you're approaching or already in retirement. Let's discuss what's occurring in the actual world, your world, while Washington engages in these maneuvers. If you've visited the grocery store lately, you've experienced it. If you've reviewed your retirement account, you've noticed it. If you've examined housing costs or attempted to assist a grandchild in finding something affordable, you understand precisely what I'm referring to. The structures we constructed our lives upon. The ones that promised if you labored diligently, saved wisely, and followed the established guidelines, you would be financially secure. Those structures are falling apart. Interest rates on mortgages have increased to heights we haven't witnessed in more than a generation. The residence you purchased many years ago for a sensible amount, young families currently can scarcely manage the initial payment on something half that dimension. Your retirement funds, even if they've increased in numerical value, don't appear to purchase as much as they ought to. Medical care expenses continue rising. Insurance costs continue rising. Everything continues rising apart from the feeling of security. And here's the emotional reality that doesn't receive adequate discussion in news coverage. You executed everything correctly. You worked for multiple decades, saved, made sacrifices, postponed vacations and indulgences to construct something stable for yourself and your family. And now observing the worth of that difficult work, feeling increasingly uncertain. That's not merely financially disheartening, it's personally devastating. It seems like the commitment was broken somewhere during the journey. Trump's announcement, despite all its political commotion, addresses that frustration directly. Whether you're supportive of him or not, his approach places him as the individual prepared to vocalize loudly what numerous people are experiencing silently. The structure isn't functioning for ordinary individuals anymore, and something requires resetting. He's not the initial politician to connect with that sentiment, not remotely. But the manner he's executing it currently in this particular moment, with this specific combination of personal power maneuvers and economic communication, is establishing something larger than merely another electoral cycle. Because here's where the narrative becomes extraordinary. This announcement wasn't arbitrary, wasn't an impulsive reaction. When you examine Trump's complete political background, you begin recognizing a sequence. And once you recognize the sequence, you understand this most recent action fits precisely into it like a puzzle component you didn't realize was absent. Let me demonstrate what I'm referring to. Return to his initial term. Consider the tariffs he implemented that economic experts claimed would devastate the economy. They generated disorder in markets temporarily. Companies became alarmed. Media published countless articles regarding trade conflicts. And then quietly, underneath all that commotion, negotiations occurred according to his conditions. Other nations approached the negotiating table differently than they would have if he'd followed by conventional diplomatic protocol. Or consider his immigration policies, the disputes, legal challenges, demonstrations, enormous disruption. But beneath everything, a repositioning of what was politically feasible to even address in Washington. Prior to his methodology, specific discussions were regarded as entirely prohibited. Afterward, even his adversaries had to participate with subjects according to terms he'd established. This isn't regarding whether those policies were beneficial or detrimental. That's a separate discussion. This is about identifying a tactic, generate controlled disorder that compels everyone else to respond according to your schedule, not theirs. And in that response, you obtain influence you wouldn't have possessed by being cautious. The most recent announcement corresponds with that sequence flawlessly. By openly severing connections with someone from his own political party, while simultaneously rejecting scandal efforts and transitioning to economic populism, he's generated multiple points of pressure simultaneously. Republicans in Congress must choose allegiances. Democrats must determine if their scandal methodology is actually functioning or merely producing commotion. And media must decide which narrative to present, understanding that whatever they concentrate on, he's already multiple steps ahead, strategizing the subsequent action. It's draining to observe, honestly. But it's also successful in manners conventional politics isn't currently, because conventional politics presumes everyone's functioning from the identical framework, adhering to the identical unspoken guidelines. Trump discards that framework and composes his own, and whether that's brilliance or carelessness somewhat depends on what he accomplishes with the influence once he possesses it, which leads us to something captivating occurring currently in actual time that most people aren't recognizing: the quietness. You would anticipate with an announcement this extreme, the media would provide continuous coverage, political establishment broadcasting from every medium, commentators analyzing it exhaustively, and certainly there's coverage. But there's also peculiar silence from particular sectors, typically the most vocal. Some significant media organizations that devoted years criticizing Trump's every action are suddenly more restrained, more careful. Some political insiders who previously forecasted his collapse with complete confidence are moderating their statements. Some businesses that indicated strong resistance are maintaining neutrality. Why? Because privately, individuals are interpreting the circumstances differently than they're revealing publicly. They're observing polling data, observing economic measurements, observing voter sentiment, and they're reassessing what the environment appears like approaching next year's election. The storyline they believed was resolved. Trump is a diminishing political presence overwhelmed by legal difficulties, isn't developing that manner. And intelligent political strategists, irrespective of party, are modifying tactics accordingly. Consider it this way. Picture yourself in a card game and you've been wagering substantially that someone possesses a weak position, but then they begin performing assertively, increasing wagers, displaying no indications of retreating. At a particular point, you must consider perhaps they're not deceiving. Perhaps you misinterpreted the situation. And if you did, you require changing your approach before you forfeit everything you invested in the game. That's what's occurring in Washington currently. The silence isn't indifference, it's reassessment. And that reassessment is occurring because insiders are observing internal party responses. The public doesn't witness Republicans who were quietly hoping Trump would diminish or understanding he's not merely maintaining relevance, he's securing control. Democrats who believe scandal following scandal would terminate him politically are witnessing those scandals fail to influence opinion like they previously did. For those of you who recall politics in the 70s, 80s, 90s, this might seem familiar in a peculiar manner. Consider Nixon traveling to China. Completely unanticipated, controversial even among his own supporters, but it fundamentally altered international politics. Consider Reagan's economic methodology, dismissed by specialists as reckless, but it transformed the discussion regarding government's function in the economy for multiple decades. Trump's announcement might be performing a comparable function just in a different period with different instruments. Less regarding ideology, more regarding influence. Less regarding policy details, more regarding positioning for whatever negotiation arrives next. And here's where I want to stop and question you something directly because I believe this matters more than we're acknowledging. What occurs when power ceases concealing behind courteous political language and just presents itself as raw positioning? When politicians cease pretending their actions are regarding principles and begin being transparent regarding the fact it's entirely about succeeding, does that make circumstances more truthful or more hazardous? I contemplate this frequently, honestly, because there's something almost invigorating about politicians who don't pretend anymore. At minimum, you understand what you're confronting. But there's also something disturbing about it. Like we're acknowledging the principles we instructed our children about public service and executing the correct thing were merely narratives we conveyed to ourselves. Both political parties execute this. Incidentally, it's not a liberal or conservative matter. Democrats envelop their power maneuvers in the terminology of justice and safeguarding democracy. Republicans envelop theirs in liberty and protecting principles. But underneath, it's the identical thing. Competing for authority and utilizing whatever moral terminology functions to validate it. The Epstein documents are a flawless illustration. Democrats are releasing them strategically, scheduling disclosures for maximum political harm, asserting it's regarding transparency and safeguarding victims. But if it were genuinely regarding victims, wouldn't they have advocated for this years previously when they possessed complete government control? Wouldn't they have conducted proceedings and required accountability comprehensively, irrespective of party? Instead, what we're observing is selective indignation. Release materials that reference Trump, conceal ones that might damage influential Democrats or contributors, present it all as a moral campaign. Well, actually, it's just opposition investigation, with a noble-sounding justification, and Trump's reply, he labels it a fabrication, rejects the whole matter, and states we should concentrate on what genuinely matters to families: affordability, employment, security. That sounds acceptable too, correct? Except he's also utilizing that communication to evade legitimate inquiries about his previous associations. So his presentation is tactical too. Neither faction is being entirely truthful. Both are utilizing morality as a tool. And the victim in all this is trust itself. Trust that our leaders are actually laboring for us and not merely performing an endless competition of political strategy where we're the pieces. Here's what I believe is worth comprehending, though. When you eliminate the moral posturing from both factions, you're remaining with something simpler and perhaps more significant. Who's actually preparing for what arrives next? Not who's succeeding in today's news rotation or tomorrow's social media conflict, but who's positioning for the actual structural transformations arriving, whether we appreciate it or not. Because while everyone's disputing about who knew Epstein or who's more dishonest, there are actual economic and technological powers developing that are going to transform everything. And whoever comprehends those powers and strategizes for them is going to possess enormous influence over what the next decade resembles. Trump's announcement, when you examine past the spectacle, includes suggestions about his economic approach. He's discussed compelling a return to domestic production, discussed utilizing tariffs not as retribution, but as negotiation instruments to return manufacturing to America, discussed confronting how much of our economy got transferred internationally to nations that don't share our concerns. Now, whether that's achievable or not, whether it would function or generate more difficulties, that's legitimately arguable. Economists are entirely divided on it. But the impulse underneath it, the concept that America surrendered excessive economic influence and requires reclaiming it, that connects with millions of individuals who observed their employment disappear internationally and their communities deteriorate. For those of you who experienced the 1982 manufacturing breakdown, you recall what that seemed like. Manufacturing facilities that had existed in your town for generations suddenly terminating, laborers with decades of expertise discovering themselves with abilities the new economy didn't appreciate, communities constructed around those employments losing their foundations. The commitment was unrestricted trade would make everyone more prosperous in the extended period. And perhaps it did for certain individuals, in certain locations, but for a substantial amount of Americans, it seemed like betrayal. Trump's economic communication connects directly into that recollection. He's essentially stating, we're going to reverse that. We're going to reconstruct what was lost. And whether he can actually fulfill that is one inquiry. But the circumstance, he's one of the only politicians even committing to attempt. That's why his support maintains strength despite everything else. The announcement indicates he's planning to make that economic communication central again. Not merely immigration, not merely cultural matters, but hardcore economics, employment, manufacturing, independence from international supply networks in a world where we discovered during the pandemic how susceptible we are when everything's manufactured somewhere else. That communication has fresh significance it didn't possess a few years previously. But here's the complication. Even if Trump succeeds in compelling some manufacturing back, even if he negotiates improved trade agreements, even if he generates conditions for economic revival, none of that matters if individuals don't believe it's authentic. And that leads us to perhaps the most substantial problem in America, currently, more substantial than any policy disagreement, the trust breakdown. Consider all the institutions individuals used to trust without inquiry. The media. Most individuals now presume they're being manipulated or deceived. And honestly, they're often accurate. The medical establishment following the pandemic, millions question everything they're informed about health. The financial structure following bank rescues and the manner inflation affected regular individuals harder than wealthy investors, trust is eliminated. Government itself. Scarcely a quarter of Americans believe Washington is laboring for them instead of special concerns. Religious institutions, educational institutions, businesses, specialists, every major institution has witnessed trust decline. And once trust is eliminated, it's incredibly difficult to recover because everything gets examined through suspicion. Even when someone's communicating the truth, individuals presume there's a concealed agenda. Even when information clearly demonstrates something, individuals presume the information was manipulated. Even when genuine beneficial intentions exist, individuals presume it's theatrical. Trump's whole political existence depends on that trust breakdown. His supporters don't trust him because he's more truthful or more ethical than other politicians. Many openly acknowledge he's not. They trust him because he confronts the identical institutions they've lost confidence in. He vocalizes what they're contemplating. He doesn't pretend to be something he's not. In a world where everything seems fraudulent, his authenticity, even if it's authentically imperfect, seems more genuine than refined politicians reciting carefully tested communication points. That's a substantial transformation in how leadership functions. It used to be leaders obtain trust by demonstrating expertise, consistency, respectability. Now leaders obtain trust by proving they're against the identical things their supporters are against. It's connecting through shared resistance rather than shared principles. And that has enormous implications for what kind of nation we're becoming and what arrives next following this announcement. Because if Trump does secure power again, he'll be functioning in an environment where conventional credibility doesn't matter anymore, where standards and precedents are regarded as impediments rather than protective measures, where advancing quickly and disrupting things, to borrow a phrase from technology, is appreciated more than careful contemplation. Some individuals find that stimulating. Finally, a leader who will actually accomplish something instead of merely managing deterioration. Finally, someone who will confront the bureaucracy and special concerns and comfortable privileged groups who've been operating things into the ground. Other individuals find that frightening. A leader with no respect for boundaries, functioning in a structure where trust and expertise have collapsed, could execute enormous harm before anyone could prevent them. Both perspectives have validity, honestly, and which one you favor probably depends on whether you believe the current structure is worth maintaining or requires being demolished and reconstructed. But here's what I believe is worth considering. Irrespective of where you position on that range, every time there's a major breakdown in how things function, whether it's trust or economics or institutions, there's an opportunity for something fresh, and what occupies that opportunity isn't predetermined. It could be something superior. It could be something inferior. It depends entirely on whether individuals are observing and making deliberate selections or merely responding emotionally to whatever's before them. Trump's announcement is component of that larger moment. The political spectacle is merely the surface underneath. What's genuinely occurring is a transformation of how power functions in America, who possesses it, how it gets utilized. So, let's discuss what that might actually resemble in practical terms for your existence. Short term, we could witness more disorder. Markets don't appreciate uncertainty, and Trump's methodology generates substantial amounts of it. Don't become alarmed, but do observe carefully. Medium term, monitor the political restructuring. The traditional classifications of Republican and Democrat are decomposing. It's becoming more regarding establishment versus populist, insider versus outsider. That restructuring will influence everything from local elections to what policies actually get enacted. Maintain awareness. Don't merely presume the party you supported. Your entire existence continues to represent what you believe it does. Long term, we're examining fundamental restructuring of how Americans contemplate about prosperity, labor, and independence. The commitment that university education and business career equals security, that's concluded for most individuals. The commitment government will provide for you in retirement. Social Security and Medicare are experiencing more pressure than ever. The commitment, if you merely follow the guidelines, everything will succeed. Numerous individuals ceased believing that long previously. What's arriving instead is probably something more disorderly, but potentially more resilient. More individuals initiating businesses instead of advancing business hierarchies. More communities generating their own support structures instead of depending on government programs. More families existing multi-generationally assisting each other instead of everyone isolating in separate residences. That might sound like we're regressing, but perhaps we're actually advancing in a different direction than we anticipated. Perhaps the hyper-individualized institution-dependent model that dominated the previous several decades wasn't sustainable, and we're discovering older arrangements of existing that actually function superior. Trump's not generating that transformation. He's a symptom of it and an accelerator. His announcement is one more indication. The traditional method of executing things is concluding, and we're in the chaotic transition interval where nobody's completely certain what arrives next. So, here's what I'd communicate to anyone listening currently. We're positioned at the boundary of another turning point where politics and economics and technology and culture all collide together in manners that only occur a few occasions in a generation. Trump's announcement is more than merely political performance. It's a reflection. It demonstrates us what we're apprehensive about, what we appreciate, what we're prepared to struggle for, and what we might become if we cease observing. You've experienced substantial change already. Witnessed the world transform in manners nobody could have forecasted when you were younger. And you've adjusted and survived and constructed satisfactory lives through all of it. This next surge of change is arriving, whether we're prepared or not. But the beneficial news is you already possess the most crucial ability, the capacity to adjust. Don't allow the disorder to overwhelm you. Don't allow the pessimism in news make you believe everything's collapsing. Things are transforming, certainly, but transformation generates opportunity equally as much as it generates risk. And the individuals who perform best in periods like these are the ones who maintain curiosity, maintain critical thinking, maintain connection to their communities, and continue contemplating for themselves instead of allowing others to execute their contemplating for them. Trump's approach, whatever you believe about him personally, is to position himself as the leader who comprehends change is arriving and possesses a strategy for it. And regarding whether his strategy is the appropriate one, whether he can actually implement it, whether it benefits or damages regular Americans, those are all legitimate inquiries. Question them. Require responses. Maintain every leader responsible, not merely the ones you disagree with. And if you discovered this breakdown beneficial, if it provided you a different manner of contemplating about what's genuinely occurring underneath all the commotion, execute me a favor. Press that approval button, subscribe to the channel, and provide a comment communicating what you believe is genuinely arriving. Because honestly, the discussion isn't concluding here. It's merely beginning. We're all attempting to comprehend this moment together. Your perspective matters. Your experience matters. The wisdom you've obtained from experiencing previous turning points in history, that's precisely what we require more of currently. We require voices of individuals who recall when circumstances were genuinely difficult previously and determined how to progress through it regardless. So share your contemplations. Let's acquire knowledge from each other because whatever arrives next, we'll navigate it superior together than we will isolated and apprehensive.